What's up everyone, and welcome back to Nexus. We live in a society dominated by brands and logos, a place where what logo you have on your products determines if you're a person worth talking to or not. You may not like it, but it is what it is. So with something as important as creating a recognizable and distinctive logo that will make consumers flock towards your product, companies go all out trying to design them and compete. Watch this video to find out the top 10 crazy stories behind famous logos. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get new content similar to this every day. Also, make sure to comment down below letting us know which was your favorite. And for this video, let's see if we can hit the golden like button, which is 1,000 likes, so make sure to drop a like down below. Number 10. Since it was released, the incredibly simple Android logo has been awash with claims of copyright infringement from all sorts of weird places. The simple little robot design really did cause a stir, probably because of the way it was created, which was by spending a couple of weeks using a humongous mood board full of all kinds of robot devices. The logo was released covertly through Google and became a fast hit, with people flocking to buy Android phones, then becoming a real competitor with Apple's dominance of the smartphone market by this point. Interestingly, the designer of the logo claims that this one was one of the first 5-minute sketches that was done, with simplicity ruling over everything else. But then people started to accuse them of plagiarism, taking their robot design from all kinds of established figures, like the famous Star Wars droid R2-D2, and even a lesser known Android figure from an Atari game called Gauntlet: The Third Encounter. Number 9. Two logos both alike in dignity. In fair NASA, where we lay our scene, is probably how Shakespeare would describe the conflict between two rival logos of the North American Space Association if he was around to hear about it now. It's interesting how NASA's logo would come up on this, since it's not exactly a commercial venture in the same way that these other items are, but it's an interesting story about one logo called the Meatball and another called the Worm. The Meatball versus the Worm sounds like a new take on King Kong vs Godzilla, but not as cool. The Meatball was the original logo, but eventually was deemed too complicated and was replaced for a while by the Worm, which was more modern and much simpler and easier to replicate. Then in 1992, horror struck, and the Worm got scrapped so that they could switch back to the outdated and antique-looking Meatball again. Number 8. Now it's time for everyone's favorite sexy mermaid, the Starbucks logo. But you probably thought to yourself time and time again, what does a mermaid have to do with coffee? It's not like coffee beans grow in the sea. Nowadays, this mermaid might have hair hanging down to cover her more distracting extremities, but back in the days of old, at the birth of this world-conquering coffee house, the Starbucks mermaid was completely naked, complete with breasts and a belly button. The mermaid is also allegedly a siren, which is actually a completely different creature in terms of the actual Greek mythology. Did you know that sirens were actually half woman, half bird, and lived on an island, where they sang to draw the sailors towards them? The Starbucks logo is a very specific mythical beast called a Melusine, which I probably butchered that name, or a twin-tailed mermaid, a creature who could shapeshift into a dragon or a serpent. That's why the logo has two tails. Kind of unfortunate it had to be dumbed down so much to be acceptable. Number 7. Of course, this company would have to come up because they're probably the biggest tech company in the world with one of the most standout logos. I am obviously talking about Apple, with their simple and famous icon of an apple with a bite taken out of it. Funny enough, the guy who designed it has never even owned an Apple product. The original logo was meant to represent Sir Isaac Newton as the apple is about to land on his head and lead him to discovering gravity, but Steve Jobs thought it was too pretentious. After various iterations, they eventually landed with the famous apple you see everywhere today. Only it was a rainbow back in the 1970s and 80s when the company was created. The current logo you see today came in 2003. However, I once heard a story that the Apple logo was symbolic of the ultimate evil. This ultimate evil being represented by the story of Adam and Eve, in which the devil persuades Eve to take a bite from an apple from the tree of knowledge, thus causing humanity to be banished from the Garden of Eden and abandoned by God. I doubt that's the reason though. Number 6. Everyone's heard of Dominos Pizza, but why are Domino's called Domino's? Where does the domino part come into it? Considering its competitors like Pizza Express and Pizza Hut are a lot more self-explanatory. Well, like all great logos, there's a story behind it. The brand dates all the way back to the 1960s and bears 2 dots in one square and 3 in the other, looking just like a domino we've probably all played before. But the 3 dots actually mean something. They represent the original 3 Domino's branches that were open the time the logo was designed. Originally, they wanted to add a dot to the logo every time a new franchise was opened, but being as Domino's is currently the 2nd largest pizza chain in the US, that would be pretty hard to maintain. Number 5. When the World Wrestling Federation got into a SmackDown lawsuit with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, previously called the World Wildlife Fund, It probably looked to everyone like the wrestling company would win. In fact, they did not. You might not have even registered that what we now call the WWE was once the WWF. Because now the WWF is associated with its famous logo of a panda to indicate how we have to save Earth's species from extinction. In 1994, they came to an agreement about the Wrestling Federation's use of the phrase WWF. But 6 years later, they were sued by Worldwide Fund for Nature because of alleged violations of the earlier agreement. Ultimately, the Fund for Nature won, and for a while, all the old WWF logos were censored on old wrestling broadcasts. This led them to changing their name to World Wrestling Entertainment. Number 4. DJ Joel Zimmerman, better known as his stage name Deadmau5, or Deadmau5, however you want to argue it, recently got into a legal dispute with a giant entertainment company, Disney. This was over Deadmau5's trademark mouse head he wears on stage and his logo, because apparently Disney think they have a right to every single mouse in the world. In 2014, they requested that the US Patent Office investigate Deadmau5's mouse head application, and then filed its opposition later on that year. It was a drawn-out legal battle that went on for a year and got pretty nasty. When he fought back by claiming they had used one of his songs in one of their videos without getting permission from his label, I guess Disney was making on an easy fight when they took him on, but ultimately nobody won or lost. It was settled amicably. Number 3. Still sticking with Disney, next up is the story of how their own logo came to be. That one not being anything to do with Mickey Mouse this time, but actually the Walt Disney Pictures logo that comes up at the beginning of every Disney movie. But did you know that for the first 48 years of the company's existence, they didn't even have a logo? Instead, all the films would open with simply Walt Disney Presents. It was in 1985 that the current logo made its appearance, the first one featuring the image of the Cinderella castle. I guess this isn't technically the current logo because it's been through many frequent changes since, but the general gist remains the same, the castle and the beam of light flying across it, even if it's become more complex and 3D since its inception. Number 2. Salvador Dali was one of the most famous surrealist artists of the last century. You've probably seen some of his paintings, most famously The Persistence of Memory with all the melting clocks, or possibly The Elephants. Regardless of how many of his weird paintings you've seen, I bet you wouldn't have guessed that he was the brain behind the Chupa Chups logo. The story goes that the owner of the company was complaining over coffee to his friend, none other than Dali, who decided to go design a logo himself. It's hardly changed since. Number 1. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was once one of the biggest movie companies in the world. Nowadays, it's still around, though it's had a spotty history of nearly going bankrupt and selling tons of its assets off. But nowhere near to the scale it once was. MGM was the big, glamorous Hollywood studio associated with high-budget musicals and films with incredibly famous stars. Stars like Marilyn Monroe, Gene Kelly, Judy Garland, and Frank Sinatra. So they needed a logo to match, of course, and that was why they went out and got a bunch of lions to roar and put on screen. Real lions, a lot of them. In fact, 7 different lions have been featured in the MGM logo since as early as 1917. That was our list of the top 10 crazy stories behind famous logos. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a video in the future. And hit the like button too so I'm going to hit the golden like of 1,000. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace!